Hey, you clicked on my video. Appreciate it. Now be sure to like the video and subscribe to the page. Long enough to cover the subject and short enough to keep it interesting. Welcome to Outta My League. I'm Nick Diaz. There is a difference between reality and mentality. See, your mentality is what you should always be doing. Like, no excuses. It's no one else's fault but the man in the mirror. All that stuff. Now, that stuff is true, and you should have that mentality. You should. As a player, as a coach, as a person, if you want to be successful in anything, you have to have that mentality of, it's no one else's fault but me. I control me. Having said that, the reality is, it's a team effort, all right? I use this example all the time. In 5 years at Michigan State, Nick Saban averaged 6.5 wins a season and a losing bowl record. In 5 years at LSU, Nick Saban averaged 9.5 wins per season and won 2 SEC titles and a national championship. Did Nick Saban become that much smarter? Did he become a harder worker? Did his mentality change? No! His reality changed. You can't do it by yourself. You need better players. You need better support. It's not all about you. That's the reality. Michael Jordan needed Phil Jackson and Scottie Pippen. Bill Belichick needed Tom Brady, and Tom Brady needed Bill Belichick, all right? Now, maybe that same concept can be applied to Frank Reich. Frank Reich, the former head coach of the Indianapolis Colts, who was just fired the other day. So for those of you who are not in tune with every NFL team, I'll break it down for you. Frank Reich was fired by the Colts after 4.5 seasons as their head coach. And this was on Monday. Now, as soon as that news broke, this was shocking to a lot of people, but I tweeted out, the Saints should heavily consider hiring Frank Reich. Matter of fact, I would make that my number one choice. Now, many of you would say, well, Nick, hold on. Why the hell should we hire a coach that was just fired? We just did that with Dennis Allen, and look what's happening. Okay, different circumstances. You know how I always say, don't just look at stats when it comes to a quarterback, because stats are for losers? Well, don't just look at a coach was fired to see if that coach is any good or not. Because around NFL circles, Frank Reich was the fall guy for the Colts' crazy owner, Jim Irsay, who's hiring a former player who has absolutely no coaching experience in the NFL or college from his current job with the media. They're trying to tank to get a new quarterback. That's what the Colts are doing. Because for the last 4 seasons, 5.5 seasons, they've had no quarterback. But despite that, Frank Reich and the Colts had a winning record, 40-33-1. And for the past 5 seasons, this was Frank Reich's record. So his first year, he had Andrew Luck, 10-6. They make the playoffs. Well, then Andrew Luck unexpectedly retires right before the season, and they are dealt with Jacoby Brissett, where they go 7-8 with him. He has Brian Hoyer for 1 game. They go 0-1. He has Carson Wentz last year. They almost make the playoffs. They go 9-8. They had Phillip Rivers in between that at one point. Phillip Rivers was on his last legs. It was his last season. He could barely throw the ball. They go 11-5 and make the playoffs. And this season, with no wide receivers, a bad offensive line, he had Matt Ryan, who's probably on his last legs as well, went 3-1, and they had to go to Sam Ehlinger, who went 0-2, and then he gets fired. Frank Reich has a winning record in the NFL. Now, you may not think much of that, but do you realize how unusual it is to have a winning record in the NFL? It is very unusual. Bill Parcells, just to give you a glimpse of how hard it is to win in the NFL, Bill Parcells, the Hall of Fame coach, finished above 500 just barely above 500 overall in his career. Dude's a Hall of Famer. Multiple Super Bowl winning coach. One of the Mount Rushmore of coaches in the history of the game. It is not as common as you think. I mean, the guy for the San Francisco 49ers, Kyle Shanahan, Mike Shanahan's kid. He's got a losing record. Remember how many times he's been to the playoffs? He's been to a Super Bowl. He still has a losing record. It's hard. You want another Bill Belichick reference? Well, too bad. I'm going to give it to you anyway. So everyone says Bill Belichick was a disaster with the Cleveland Browns, and he's nothing without Tom Brady. That is revisionist history. Because if you actually do your research, you realize that he actually went to the playoffs with the Browns and won a playoff game with the Browns. without having a franchise quarterback. Now, he got fired his last season in Cleveland because the Browns were moving to Baltimore to become the Ravens, and they were essentially tanking their last season there. And Bill Belichick and everybody was let go, and they were cleaning house and starting fresh, and, he had a bad attitude about it because nobody likes Bill Belichick's, personality, God forbid. And so everyone's like, oh, he's a failure and he's a horrible coach. No. The Patriots figured that out, hired him, and the rest is history. Now, when it comes to Frank Reich, not saying he's going to have some great Hall of Fame career, but it's not just his head coaching career that you need to look at. It's also his assistant coaching career. If a place gets worse after you leave, usually that means that they were successful mainly because of you. Now, when the Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2017, Frank Reich was their offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. Now, I'm not saying it's all on him, but as soon as he left, the team went into the tank, especially their quarterback play. And a lot of the media that does their research, the good media, the local journalists, Eagles players who were in that locker room, some other coaches who were in the locker room as well, will tell you that Frank Reich essentially was, to give you an LSU reference, he was essentially the Dave Aranda of that championship team. He was the one sort of holding everything together. He was the glue that was organized and mature and structured and kind of making the head coach, who was an offensive play caller himself, and Doug Peterson, kind of look better than he actually was. Now, maybe everything that I just told you is bullshit. Maybe. But after everything I have just said, the Saints would be stupid not to make a run at Frank Reich at the end of the season. Bring him in for an interview. So what? Big deal. If it turns out that he's not that great and he's not a good fit and he's a washed-up coach and the Colts actually made a good decision because they saw the end coming, then fine. Fine. But don't be a bad franchise and not at least give Frank Reich a phone call. What's an interview going to hurt? Because here's the thing. There is no such thing as a sure thing when it comes to NFL head coaching hires. It's not like college where you start off at, a small school and then you work your way up to a slightly bigger school and then a Power 5 school that's not a real contender, and then you get the big job like in LSU or in Alabama. That's not how it works in the NFL. You're sort of taking a big gamble with unproven coordinators and assistants, especially unproven head coaches. This guy, he's pretty proven, and he's been proven pretty much everywhere he's been as an assistant coach as well. And he will have a lot of suitors this offseason. The Saints better be one of them. Thanks for listening to Out of My League. If you like what you heard, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Or follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok in the description link below.